So my name is Albertus Angga. You can call me Albert. And today I will share about Flex layout with the talk title named Understanding Flex Layout with Flutter Layout Explorer. So what is Flutter Layout Explorer? This is a new feature that probably most of you have never heard before. We will talk about this later in the end. So this talk is delivered, this talk is intended for beginner users. So if you never code in Flutter, it's okay. I will go through with you from the beginning. If you are maybe intermediate or advanced Flutter user, you will also gain something from this talk because I will introduce new tool for you. So hopefully this talk will be relevant to all of you. And if you want to access the slide, there's already the link there. So yeah, about me. In case you haven't known about me, I was born in Jember, Jawa Timur. Jember, Jawa Timur. Anyone from Jawa Timur here? Yeah, one. My junior. Yeah. I'm currently a final year computer science student at Universitas Indonesia. Previously, I was a software engineering intern at Google. Last fall, it was in September until December 2019. I joined Flutter team in the developer experience team in the Seattle office. I also work on this tool called Flutter Layout Explorer as part of the DevTools. So I'm just curious here, do anyone here have ever heard about DevTools? Please raise your hand. One, okay. Two, okay, cool. So yeah, DevTools is actually a DevTools for Flutter, but the name is currently Dart because you can profile not only Flutter app, but also Dart app. It's currently in preview, so that's why maybe the reason that you haven't heard of it yet. And then I got the chance to attend Flutter Interact earlier last year as one of the Flutter team member. So you can see it's a picture. It's like a dream for me because I get a badge with my name on it, with Google and Flutter team in it. So maybe that's one in a lifetime experience. So this is a photo with Dash, the Flutter mascot. And I took this photo in the Google headquarters in Mountain View office because I got to fly there in my first week in Google. So if you intern in Google in US, probably you will attend the orientation in Mountain View office, which is the headquarters, or in the New York office. And I got to attend it in the Mountain View office. So that was a bit cool to see like Google headquarters. And then this is the outline of this talk. I will talk about first the Flutter Interact recap. Why? Because Flutter Interact is the biggest event in Flutter after the first stable release in 2018. It was the biggest event in 2019. We will talk about Flutter Interact to give you state about what's going on with Flutter right now. And then after that, we will talk about topics more specific with this talk. So I will talk about layouts in Flutter. And then after that, we will proceed to Flex layout and then how to use them with the widgets, Flex widget. And then we will try to cover Flex concept. So if you're not familiar with Flex concepts yet, I will go through it with you, together with you. And then we will talk about Overflow Error, which is the most common error in Flutter. And then I will talk about my feature, Flutter Layout Explorer, which will help you regarding those topics that I mentioned before. And then I will introduce you to DevTools and Flutter Inspector. And then the top 3 ways to use Layout Explorer, and finally we will have the demo. Hopefully I'm not going too fast. So yeah, let's talk about Flutter Interact. So Flutter Interact was held last December with the biggest event of Flutter of the year. So Flutter team announced the latest stable release with version 1.12. It's one of the biggest stable release up to date. With Flutter Interact, they announced a lot of things, and the major things is, first one is Flutter app to app is now stable with few limitations. So what does it mean now? It means now that you can build Android app or iOS app without using completely Flutter. So you can just mix in like one screen, two screen using Flutter. It seems like small, but this is really big because as you can see, a lot of big companies are still reluctant to use Flutter because they don't have the engineering capabilities to rewrite all of their app within Flutter. So with app-to-app being stable, it means that most of the big companies will try to integrate Flutter in their existing code base. Because why? With Flutter, you can enjoy all the good points of Flutter, the fast development experience, the beautiful app, easy animation support, and etc. without, well, customizing, without the pain of mobile development. And then there's iOS 13 Dart mode supported officially. And then the latest release is Dart 2.7 release. This add static extension method, which is very good. You should take a look about it. It's similar to Kotlin extension method, so it will make your life as developer much more easier. And then we have some exciting news about Flutter for desktop. So Flutter for desktop previously was already in technical preview, which means you can build Flutter app in desktop, but it's not advised yet because they are still like changing the API. So you should not use it in production yet. You can if you want to, but well, you have to maintain it. And then with the Interact, the macOS support for desktop has gone to alpha channel, which is, well, now you can maybe probably build cool stuff with Flutter for macOS desktop, with the Linux and Windows still coming later. And then Flutter for web has gone to beta support. So now with single code base, you can compile to Android, iOS, and web at the same time in the beta channel, which is very exciting, right? And then we have .path.dev support for Flutter, which is of the official code sandbox for Flutter. So if you see the Flutter documentation now, you can compile it directly with the code sandbox without relying on third party. And then there's Hot UI, which is very cool. This was made by my manager, Jacob Richmond, in Seattle office. It's an inline IDE tools to make widgets, so you don't have to run the Flutter app first to get like the UI of your widget. And then the last thing is my feature. It's called Layout Explorer in Dart DevTools, and we will talk more about this tool later on. And if you are interested to learn more about Flutter Interact Recap, you can see this blog in Medium by Chris Sales. And then first we will talk about layouts in Flutter. So Flutter, if you want to build some UI, you have to determine which layout you will use first. And in Flutter, you have two types of layout. So the first question is, you will ask whether you want to lay out a single widget or a multiple widget. And we have tons of layout widgets in Flutter. So there's align, container, center for laying out single child. But if you want to lay out multiple child at the same time, you will have to consider most of this widget here in the right side. And brings us to flex layout, which is the go-to layout for multi-child widget. Why? Because it's one of the most common layout in Flutter. Because also it's the most easy widget to use for laying out multiple children. You just have to declare you want to lay it out vertically or horizontally. It's very similar to CSS Flexbox. If you're familiar with web development, CSS, you can probably take it easy for the next few slides. I will tell you once you have to like think a bit harder, because all of these concepts is exactly the same with CSS Flexbox. So that's all about Flex widgets. How to use Flex layout in Flutter. So in Flutter, to use Flex widgets, there are three widgets. The first one is row, the second one is column, and the third one is flex. I will explain what's the difference between them. Row, if you want to lay out children horizontally, you will have to use row. But if you want to lay out children in vertically, you have to use column. So how about flex? So basically, flex column is actually just extension of flex. So it's just a subclass of flex. So the code in the left part is actually the same with the code in the right part. So if you want to use flex, you just have to specify the direction. In this case, column, the direction is axis.vertical. In case of row, you have to use axis.horizontal. So they are just the same. They are interchangeable. You can use both of them depending on what you need. So my recommendation is to stick with row or column. If at compile time you already know you want to lay out your children vertically or horizontally, but if it's dependent on runtime, for example, on the screen size in web, because in web you can resize the screen, you'll have to use this one, the direction. So you can, this is one of the most mainstream pattern in responsive design. So you have to change the direction based on the screen available screen size. It's not new. Since Flutter for web is now beta, probably you will need to use flex, but most of the time you don't have to use it. You just have to use row or column. So that's all about flex concept. The first concept is direction. As I mentioned before, row is horizontal, column is vertical. So axis here is a class from Flutter. It's an enum class. And the possible value is only horizontal and vertical. And then main axis and cross axis. This is a new term. If you're familiar with Flexbox, you already know it. So main axis is the direction which is the same as the direction of your widget. So if it's row, the main axis is the horizontal. If column, the main axis is the vertical. Cross axis is the second axis that's different from the main axis. So if main axis is vertical, the cross axis should be horizontal. And we will talk about the alignments later. This is just a concept, a new term. So let's talk about main axis. In CSS Flexbox, you have all of this, and in Flutter, you have also all of this. So you have start, center, and space between, space evenly, and space around. What does it mean? So if you specify your main axis alignment, which is default to, if I'm not mistaken, it's default to center. So if you have available space here, your children will be placed in the center of the available space. If you declare in start, it will be laid out in start, and it will be laid out in end. But for space between, there will be space exactly the same among one child with another child. With space evenly, with space between, there will be no leading space and trailing space. So it will just in the in between. With space evenly, you will have the leading and the trailing space, but it will be exactly the same, all of the space. But with space around, you will have the start and the end a bit different, and then the space between the children will be the same. So that's all just the difference of it. So it depends on your UI design, which one you will have to use. Sorry, so this should be cross-axis. About cross-axis, it should be start, end, center, stretch, and baseline. So it's just the same, but if cross-axis, if main axis, if you are laying out horizontally, row, so you the main axis one will specify the horizontal direction. If cross-axis, if you're using row, it will specify the vertical direction. We will cover these topics more in the demo. So if you don't really understand it right now, it's okay. So the next concept is flexible inflexible child. So assume we have a screen. This is a row widget. And then we have three children. The first two children is inflexible. What does it mean by inflexible? So inflexible child is a widget. Is a child widget that doesn't have flex factor set to it. So how do you set flex factor? To set flex factor, you have to wrap your child widget with expanded or flexible widget. So if it's not wrapped inside expanded or flexible, it will be considered as inflexible. Or setting the flex factor to 0 will make the child widget to be inflexible. So other than 0 or other than child that doesn't have like expanded or flexible as direct parent of it will be treated as inflexible child. Other than that, it will be treated as flexible. So if you declare your widget wrapped inside expanded or flexible, the default flex factor is 1. We will cover more about the flex factor in the next slide. But how does Flutter does their layout with flex? First, it will lay out the inflexible for one first. So the inflexible will have its constraint and its size, and then the remaining space will be used for flexible child. How about multiple flexible children? So if a flexible child, have a flex factor. So in this case, we have two children. The first one has flex factor 1. The second one has flex factor 2. What does it mean? It means that the first child will occupy 1/3 of the space, and the second one will occupy 2/3 of the space. So where does this number came from? The third one. So the 3 here comes from the sum of all of the flexible children. So here the sum of 1 and 2 is 3. So if you have 3 children, 1, 2, and 3, the total of the flex factor will be 6. So if there's 1, 2, and 3, the first child will occupy 1 per 6. The second child will occupy 2 per 6 of the space, and the second one will occupy half of it. So that's the concept of flexible and inflexible. And then we will move on to the next term in Flutter. It's called flex fit. So in Flutter, there are two kind of flex fit. The first one is flex fit.type. The second one is flex fit.loose. And what's the difference between them? The first one, if your if your parent widget space allocates space 100 dp, and then your child widget have a constraint, minimum constraint of 50 dp, it will force it to 100 dp. But for flex fit.loose, if the allocated space is 100 dp and the child main constraint is 50 dp, it will not force it to 100 dp. So this will be useful if you have like a small widget that you don't want to expand. You should use flex fit.loose if you care about it. But most of the time you can do with flex fit.type. So using flex fit, the two main difference are using the widget. It's expanded or flexible. So if expanded, the fit is you can't change the fit. The fit for expanded is default to flex fit.type. For flexible, the default is the same, but you can change it to flex fit.loose. And then we will go to the problem here. So using flex layout will introduce you to a new kind of problem or error, which is overflow error. This is one of the most common errors in Flutter, and this is caused by child widget that try to be larger than its parent, and it happens a lot when keyboard appears. So if you have like a column widget, and it seems fine if you don't open a keyboard, but when user tries to type something and a keyboard appears, usually you see overflow happening, like in the bottom of the screen. This is the most common error, and sometimes it's very hard to debug. And yeah, it's not trivial to debug overflow error, which comes to our next topic, debugging overflow error. As you can see, there's an overflow here in the right side. I'm using row column here. The app here is used in Flutter Interact. It's called Flutter Ticket Vault. It was made by a design company in New York. So as you can see here, when overflow happens, it will throw scary console log error in your terminal, which is a bit hard to debug, right? Because when you see this kind of thing in your UI, maybe you will start to question why does this happen, and then you will see the console. Wow, this is a lot of message here. So it's a bit scary to debug it if you are like still a beginner user. And it brings us to Flutter Layout Explorer. So Flutter Layout Explorer is my internship project in Google. It's a new feature in DevTools aimed to help developers to debug their layout issues with Flutter. So it currently supports only flex layout with initial focus on overflow error. So if you use Layout Explorer, you can see the constraint, the size of your child widget visually, so you don't have to see the scary console message again. And here, the key features of Flutter Layout Explorer is it will help you to understand your layout visually, and then it will help you to understand flex concepts as well. Because here, if you're using row, it will draw main axis is this one, cross axis is this one, and you can experiment with changing the main axis alignment or cross axis alignment here without making any changes to the code. So it only helps you to visually understand it. And then you can also change the flex factor here from 0, 1, 0, 1, 2, 3, 3, 4, 5, and you can see, you can experiment with it, and it will directly be reflected in your device as well. We will go into the demo later. So, how to try this feature? It's already available in the Flutter .dev jobs, but it's not really well known right now because it was just recently announced. Using this tool requires a Flutter SDK with version 1.12.16 or more, but you have to switch from stable channel to beta or dev or master, which is unfortunate because I missed like a deadline to land this PR. If I landed this commit like 3 hours before, it will go into the stable channel, but unfortunately that's not the case. So it's really unfortunate. But yeah, if you want to use Flutter for web, you can switch to beta, and there's no difference in testing from the Flutter team between beta and stable. So it's relatively safe to use beta channel as of now. So yeah, if you want to try this out, it's unfortunate, but you have to change to beta channel. And then we will move on to Dart DevTools. So why am I covering this? So Flutter Layout Explorer lives inside Dart DevTools. So what is Dart DevTools? Dart DevTools is an ID agnostic developer tools. So chance is if you are writing Flutter code, chances are you are using VS Code, IntelliJ, or Android Studio, right? But in VS Code and Flutter IntelliJ, you can see some tooling there that you can use. For example, in IntelliJ, you can use Flutter IntelliJ, which allows you to autocomplete, refactor, and it has some developer tools as well, like Flutter Inspector. But you have to use it if you use IntelliJ. But with Dart DevTools, the idea is no matter what ID or text editor that you use, you can still use this tool to help your development. So maybe you use Vim, Emacs, you can still use this platform because it's a web, so you can run it from terminal and use it by yourself. So the features include Flutter Inspector plus Layout Explorer that we will cover later, and the timeline page, which here is a timeline page. It will help you to profile the CPU time for your application. You can see what event takes the most time and stuff if you really need to like optimize your performance. It has also memory page that can profile your memory consumption, your performance, and then logging, which is just like a nice version of your CLI. And it supports both dark and light mode, and it's written 100% in Flutter for web, but it's currently in alpha. So the previous version of Dart DevTools is written in Dart, but now they are writing it again in Flutter web. So Flutter Inspector. What's Flutter Inspector? Flutter Inspector is a powerful tool for visualizing and exploring Flutter widget trees. If you come from web development, chances are you have tried to use Inspector, right? In Chrome, you can right click and then click inspect. But in Flutter, since it's not web, you cannot do that. So it brings us to Flutter Inspector, which will help you as you develop your UI. You can click on your widget and then it will display some information about your widget, like the padding, the size, the constraint, the margin, and then the child of it. You can see a lot of stuff here. It is very useful. So if you haven't checked it and you feel like you have a bit of problem while developing UI with Flutter, you should try to check it. And it helps you to visualize and explore Flutter widget trees, and it's an entry point for Layout Explorer feature. So the top 3 ways to use Layout Explorer is, first one, it can debug your overflow error by playing with the flex vectors. And then you can experiment with changing the main or cross-axis alignment, because sometimes it's confusing to know which is the main axis, which is the cross-axis. So you can, you cannot worry, you will have to, you don't have to worry about it if you're using Layout Explorer. Then you can understand expanded or flexible widget by playing with the flex fit. So those are the top 3 ways to use Layout Explorer. So we will go to the last part of the talk, which is the demo. Here, I already have DevTools open in the left and an app in the right. So here, I will try to introduce you to Flutter Inspector. First, you have to click here, select widget mode. If you don't click here, you can just interact with it normally. It will not do anything with the DevTools, but you can select the widget here in the tree. Here's the details tree. But if you use select widget mode here and you click it here, it will point you to a widget that you click, and you will be able to gain a lot of information by using this inspector. As you can see here, the row, it's a row widget and it has direction horizontal. The main axis alignment is center, main axis size is max, blah blah blah. A lot of information is going here. And if you go to Layout Explorer here, you can see it visually instead of like text. You can just see, hey, we have a row widget which has 2 children, padding and text, and they're both inflexible because the flex is null, and they're both using fit.type. You can also see the width here. The width of the padding is 16, the width of the text is 60, and both of them are unconstrained. But here we have interesting problem. We have overflow here, and I will do it by clicking the overflow here. It will point you to exact widget that is overflowing, in this case because I click on the overflow area. And then here you can try playing with the lot of stuff here. For example, the cross axis. If the cross axis is currently set to start, so if I change it to center, what will happen? So it will make your app look exactly if you set the cross-axis alignment to center, and it will reflect as well in the DevTools. You can also still play with it. For example, stretch. It will make the size the same for both of the widget. But here we have a problem, which is overflow, and the overflow error happened because this widget, the text, the width is 400, around 400, but the parent only have width around 300, which is way smaller than the child, right? So we can fix it by setting the flex factor from null to 1. And voila, the overflow problem is fixed now. But the thing with Layout Explorer is it only helps you to visualize it. You don't have to change the code, but later on you have to change the code manually. So the idea is to just experiment with it as of now. Maybe in the future we don't know if it will like directly change your code, but as of now it's still on the experimental to help you just visualize things. So here we fix the overflow error by making the child flexible, so it doesn't force itself to occupy the whole width of the widget. So if you happen to encounter overflow error and you are using row or column, the first fix is try to wrap them inside expanded or flexible widget. Most of the time it will fix it. So if you're unsure about using it directly, you can use this feature and try whether setting the flex vector will fix the error or not. So other than that, you can also use this tool to maybe understand or help your UI development. For example, I want to make this widget and this widget have the same width. So how do I do it? I will do it by setting the flex vector both to 1. And voila, now they have exactly the same width. So you can see here, the width is the same and the height is the same because they have the stretch cross axis. If I change it to start, it doesn't change as well because the height here is expanding because of the width. So it wraps the line. But if we see another widget, let's see here. So here, we can see a bit of free spaces. And free space here happens because we don't have any flexible child. Because if we have any, even one flexible child, it will occupy the whole space. So if I change this one to flex one, so this will be laid out first, zone, seat, and class. And then the remaining space will be allocated to row, which is the reason why you don't see any free space here. But you can see the experiment with changing the flex fit as well. In this case, it's set to type, so it will be forced to occupy the whole space. But if it's set to fit.loose, it will not be forced to occupy the whole space. Then it will just allocate the space regarding to the minimum constraint that it has to fulfill. In this case, it only has to fulfill gate, so this one. So yeah, that's it about Flutter Layout Explorer. You can play with the cross-axis and see if it changes, but in this case, in the cross-axis width is already occupied fully, so changing this value will not reflect anything in your app. But you can also play with the start in the main axis. And yeah, that's my demo about Flutter Layout Explorer. And then the last part is how to try .DevTools. So here I have IntelliJ here. I haven't tried to run anything yet, so I will try to run first. And then if it's run already in your app, in your device, you will be able to click one of these three buttons. Here, this is hot reload, this is hot restart, and this is DevTools. So if you want to open DevTools, you can click this button, and it will open a new tab in your Chrome browser or any default browser that you use. So this is for IntelliJ. If you are using VS Code, you can also do the same thing. You start it first, and then here you'll have kind of a lot of buttons here, and you can click the right one. This is Open DevTools widget. If you click this, it will open also a new tab in your browser which points to the DevTools, and you can start using it. Or if you don't use any IDE or text editor, you can start it from terminal if that's your favorite thing to do. So in this case, you have to do Flutter pub global activate DevTools first. After that, you can just use Flutter pub run DevTools. Earlier, I tried using it in the command line as well. And what you have to do is, after you run your Flutter app using terminal Flutter run, you can press H key, and then you will have kind of URL here. So you just have to copy this. And then if you open DevTools here, you can paste the URL here, and you can start using DevTools. So yeah, that's the introduction to DevTools and how you can use Flutter Inspector and the Layout Explorer. And then closing this talk, check out these awesome resources. So all of the stuff that I discussed in this talk is available in the documentation. How to use DevTools, you can check it in the flutter.dev. Using the Flutter Inspector, you can also check it in the docs. And then understanding types of layouts in Flutter, you can also check the documentation as well. And then if you are interested in understanding how the flex layout complete algorithm looks like, you can also check the API. And I highly recommend to follow this Flutter YouTube channel. They have a series called Widget of the Week, where they publish a video new week, maybe just like 1 minute, 2 minutes, and they will introduce you to new widget that you can use. So it's really good. You should check it out. And we also have Flutter team also have a boring development show, which try to cover how to develop like full stack app in Flutter, which is pretty fun to follow. And then if you are interested about Flutter 1.12, you can also check the Medium blog. And then feel free to reach me out at my Gmail, my Twitter, or my LinkedIn here. That's all from my talk. Thank you. Any questions?